Shieh has agreed to come and speak with us today. And I know there's been a lot of enthusiasm generated before the talk. I'm sure you'll deliver. Wen Shan Shieh is an associate professor in the Department of Applied Foreign Languages at Chien University in Taipei. Her research interests include modernism, short fiction, Catherine Mansfield study, Alice Munro study, and medical humanities. Her research has been published in numerous peer-reviewed journals and has been recognized with various accolades, including being shortlisted for the Catherine Mansfield Society Essay Prize. It is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Shieh. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for the nice introduction, Professor Acadia. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming on a rainy day. I know you all have a very busy schedule. Thanks for making time for my talk. I'm honored to be given a cherished opportunity to share my research on Alzheimer's disease and Alice Munro's fiction with you. I will begin today's talk by giving you a brief introduction to Alzheimer's disease. And this 3-minute video will show the progression of Alzheimer's disease, how it damages the brain and how it affects behavior.
What is Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's is a slow, fatal disease of the brain affecting 1 in 10 people over the age of 65. No one is immune. The disease comes on gradually as 2 abnormal protein fragments called plaques and tangles accumulate in the brain and kill brain cells. They start here in the hippocampus, the part of the brain where memories are first formed. Over many years' time, the plaques and tangles slowly destroy the hippocampus, and it becomes harder and harder to form new memories. Simple recollections from a few hours or days ago that the rest of us might take for granted are just not there. After that, more plaques and tangles spread into different regions of the brain, killing cells and compromising function wherever they go. This spreading around is what causes the different stages of Alzheimer's. From the hippocampus, the disease spreads here to the region of the brain where language is processed. When that happens, it gets tougher and tougher to find the right word. Next, the disease creeps toward the front of the brain, where logical thought takes place. Very gradually, a person begins to lose the ability to solve problems, grasp concepts, and make plans. Next, the plaques and tangles invade the part of the brain where emotions are regulated. When this happens, the patient gradually loses control over moods and feelings. After that, the disease moves to where the brain makes sense of things it sees, hears, and smells. In this stage, Alzheimer's wreaks havoc on a person's senses and can spark hallucinations. Eventually, the plaques and tangles erase a person's oldest and most precious memories, which are stored here in the back of the brain. Near the end, the disease compromises a person's balance and coordination. And in the very last stage, it destroys the part of the brain that regulates breathing and the heart. The progression from mild forgetting to death is slow and steady, and takes place over an average of 8 to 10 years. It is relentless and, for now, incurable. Helping your family, friends, and neighbors to better understand Alzheimer's will reduce stigma, improve care, and even help the fight for a cure.
As the ending of the video points out, although AD, I will call Alzheimer's disease as AD henceforth in my talk. Although AD is relentless and now incurable, helping your family, friends, and neighbors to better understand AD will reduce stigma, such as loss of self, and improve care. The video reminds us that AD affects not only patients but also caregivers and the whole society. AD is now recognized as the most common type of dementia, a general term for memory loss and other cognitive ability serious enough to interfere with daily life. More information on AD can be found on this website, What is Alzheimer's? AD affects on patients' memory, communication, and the strained caring relations between AD patients and their caregivers account for the increasing visibility of this illness in contemporary narratives and films. Over the past 20 years, there have been no shortage of attempts to write about AD or adapt literary works on AD into films, such as Richard Iris, a 2001 film about how the English novelist Alice Munro was suffering from AD and tended to by her devoted yet frustrated husband, John Bailey. The film is based on the John Bailey's memoir, Elegy for Iris. And also, Richard Glazer's Still Alice is a 2015 film based on Lisa Genova's 2007 novel of the same name. The film is about Alice Holland, a professor diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease, and Florian Zeller's father, a 2020 film adapted from Zeller's stage play of the same name. The film is about a father and daughter struggling with their difficult relationship as he suffers from Alzheimer's. Although these films and literary works have all been well received, I chose to focus on Alice Munro's fiction since her short stories cover the widest range of caring relationships, including mother and daughter, husband and wife, patient and nurse. Illness and caring relations have always been recurrent concerns in Alice Munro's short stories. While some of her earlier stories respond to her mother's Parkinson's disease, she attempts to explore AD in her later stories, such as The Bear Came Over the Mountain or Inside of the Lake, as she herself ages. She described AD from the perspective of both the caregiver and the patient. While The Bear Came Over the Mountain and Spelling offer the caregiver's perspectives. For example, Spelling talks about mother and daughter relationship, and The Bear Came Over the Mountain focuses on husband and wife relationship. And also, in Side of the Lake, in this story, she tries to imagine Alzheimer's experience from the patient's perspective. In today's talk, I want to examine Munro's contribution to AD narratives and our understanding of Alzheimer's disease by following the following issues. First, how do Munro's AD narrative help the reader to acknowledge the incomprehensible otherness of AD and provide the reader with new ways to write and think about AD? Second, how do her stories capture what makes caring relationships between AD patients and their caregiver testing? Third, how do her AD stories redefine what comprises selfhood in AD patients by exploring how the relational self and collaborative relations are established through the interaction between AD patients and their caregivers? First, I will address the existing approaches to Munro's AD narrative and their limitations. Munro's AD fiction have been read both metaphorically or literally. For example, Linda Simon's article, Battling the Invisible Predator, Alzheimer's Disease as Metaphor, consider Munro's portrayal of AD patients as a metaphor for reflecting the contemporary fear of isolation, disorientation, and fragmentation. Simone observed that the loss of short-term memory has become synonymous with loss of self. Simone believes that AD is used by Munro as a metaphor to highlight ontological issues besieging contemporary men and women, such as the loss of independence or the uncertainty of marriage. Also, Sarah Polley, the filmmaker who adapted Munro's The Bear Came Over the Mountain into a film away from her, also considers AD as a metaphor used by Munro to address larger issues such as love and marriage. However, this metaphorical reading that associates memory loss caused by AD with the loss of self and marriage can be limited due to its reliance on the selfhood premised upon individualism and an intimate relationship shaped mainly by cognitive abilities. On the other hand, Begona Simone's article, Memory Matters, Alice Munro's narrative handling of Alzheimer's in The Bear Came Over the Mountain and Inside of the Lake, reads AD in Munro's story literally. Simone contends that in Munro's story, AD is much more than a metaphor for exploring an abstract concept. She goes on to claim that Munro's AD stories explicitly explore the very nature of the disease, with the painful loss of memory and its tenuous grasp of reality. I agree with Simone's observation that in Munro's fiction, AD is used more literally than metaphorically. Simone's literal reading, which seeks signs and symptoms of AD within Munro's stories, however, might be restrictive, since AD is an illness that defies easy rational comprehension, thereby posing a challenge to reading if the reader only focuses on the AD sufferer in stories. Since the cognitive impairment caused by AD makes the communication between their sufferers and caregivers challenging, AD's effects on its caregivers need to be acknowledged. As Professor Chen Chongren had indicated in his article, Loving the Time of Illness, writing on pen and metaphor of illness and Saturday, despite Susan Sontag's argument in her earlier work, Illness as Metaphor, that the metaphorical reading of disease can lead to social prejudice, discrimination, and moral condemnation in culture, she cannot deny that metaphorical connections are the foundation for generating and accumulating medical knowledge. Chen further analyzed and argued that the diagnostic processes of determining the type of disease are basically processes for producing meaning. That is, the examination and treatment conducted by doctors are also part of the process of producing meaning. Ultimately, diseases cannot be detached at a metaphorical level. To overcome the limitations of both the literal and metaphorical readings, my paper first, I propose two reading strategies. First, I refer to Simone's literal interpretation of AD symptoms in Munro's fiction, but expands the discussion beyond the context of patients to emphasize the care relationship between patients with dementia and their caregivers. Given the cognitive impairments caused by dementia, which complicate communication between patients and caregivers, the effect of the condition on caregivers should also be highlighted. Second, inspired by Chen's discussion on Sontag, this paper infers that positive metaphors may be drawn from AD. Although Simone viewed AD as a metaphor for the loss of self, this paper aims to broaden the metaphorical reading of dementia, exploring the potential for care relationship involving individuals with AD to be used as a metaphor for establishing a relational self. Then I will talk about how AD narrative can make us recognize the incomprehensible. In Illness's narrative, Anne Jurisic argues that Susan Sontag provokes readers to pay attention to the pain of others by telling them a story and that story helps him to understand how difficult it is to know that pain. Joy Ng Song has later stated in regarding the pain of others that narratives can make us understand how difficult it is to know the pain of others. Jurassic maintains that illness narrative can serve as a tool that makes available new ways of thinking about the unthinkable. Here, I suggest that the unthinkable could be used to describe the incomprehensible experiences of suffering from AD, an illness that defies rational comprehension. Munro's illness narrative reminds us that the subjective experience of AD patients remains what Jurassic calls unthinkable. Munro's AD stories invite readers to re-examine what constitutes the self and humanity in AD patients instead of stigmatizing them as socially dead, simply because of their failure to recognize their caregivers. AD fiction also provides a narrative framework for readers who provide care for AD patients to cope with the overwhelming stress of care and make their caring work meaningful. Following Jurassic understanding of illness narrative as therapeutic tools of understanding that cannot be understood, and David Spacing's assertion that the self is relational, the first part of this talk shows how in Munro's stories, a relational self of both AD patients and caregivers are established. Drawing on Amelio Di Falco's concept of the potential of collaboration in caring relations, the second part of this talk explores how caregivers in Munro's stories attempt to build collaborative relations with the care receivers who may no longer recognize them. In this talk, I argue that Munro's AD stories counter the tendency to regard AD and its losses within scripts of the loss of self or the socially dead by presenting the possibilities of establishing relational self in AD patients through interaction with others, while exploring how caring relations are tested between AD patients and their caregivers. Munro's stories also depict the potential of building collaborative relations between AD patients and their caregivers. In her article on recognition, caring, and dementia, Jenna Taylor described her own experience as the daughter of a mother who suffers from AD, frustrated by the recurring question raised by others, does she recognize you? The repeated question implies that, as H. Sui Ting and Gehuli point out, the ability to recognize others appears to be the most important determinant of whether or not social death occurs. I argue that what makes a caring relation between AD patients and their caregiver challenging is not only the AD sufferer's cognitive disability, but also the caregiver's fear of losing themselves while caring for AD patients. Not being recognized by a care receiver tests the caregiver's identity and relationship with the patient. This aspect of care relations is deeply explored in Munro's short stories. For example, in The Bear Came Over the Mountain, who is a man if his wife no longer recognizes him as her husband? In Spilling, who is a woman if her stepmother fails to recognize her as her stepdaughter? In Forget Memory, Anne Davis Spacey questioned the tendency to cast an AD patient as a loss of self and claims that we must remember that memory is social and the self is relational, questioning the commonplace understanding of a selfhood premised upon independence. Spacey contends that people with AD are an extreme example of a self that is relational, that is formed through interaction with others. On the other end of the spectrum, however, is not an independent self, but simply a less extreme example. Drawing on Basing's notion of the relational self, I argue that both caregivers and AD patients' selves can be reframed through interaction with others. This is a trailer of a Sarah Polley's film adaptation of Alice Munro's short story. I think we can take a look at this trailer.
"摆脱私密处湿闷异味，生理期必须一镜到底。我用 Cortex 操。
She was 18, she said. Didn't think it'd be fun if we got married. I never wanted to be away from her.
Half the time I wander around looking for something which I know is very perfect. I can't remember what it is. Everything is gone.
I couldn't just leave her here.
We understand it is very difficult to leave a loved one in a new environment for so long.
I don't think I like the place.
I think all we can aspire to in this situation has a little bit of grace.
Because I'm still in love with you.
You can't go away from me like this.
I need to stay here, and if you make it hard for me, I might cry so hard I'll never stop. I'd like to make love, and then I'd like you to go. What we're handling isn't so easy.
There she is.
So you made a new friend. Good. What's he doing with Albert?
He doesn't confuse me. He doesn't confuse me at all.
Look at me, Fiona. I'm your husband. We've been married for 45 years. We've had a good life together.
So I think this trailer is a very good summary of the story. A story is about a woman with Alzheimer's who voluntarily enters a long-term care facility to avoid being a burden on her husband of 50 years. In this story, the husband, Grant's selfhood is altered by Fiona's institutionalization and memory loss. According to the rule of the nursing home, Grant is not allowed to visit Fiona during the first 30 days, as new residents need that time to adjust to the new environment. As he prepares to visit of a sound tingling, as in the old days on the morning of his first planned meeting with a new woman, Fiona's new identity as a new woman, a woman whom her husband intends to know all over again, provokes Grant to do something new, for example, buying flowers. He experienced himself as a character in a cartoon. He had never presented flowers to Fiona before or to anyone else. He entered the building feeling like a hopeless lover or a guilty husband in a cartoon. To his surprise, visiting Fiona after a month's separation makes him even sadder and lonelier because Fiona does not seem to recognize him as shown in the film trailer. At Meadow Lake is the name of the nursing home. Fiona forms a close attachment to another resident, Aubrey. They play cards together regularly. When Grant gets near the card table, he finds himself a strange intruder when Fiona greets him and offers him tea, which he never drinks. Moreover, the way in which she gazes in Aubrey's direction and the blush displayed on her face when she talks about Aubrey reveal an intimacy that excludes her husband. When Kirsty, a staff member at the nursing home, asks him whether he's glad to see her participating in everything, Grant cannot answer directly, but is rather concerned about whether Fiona can recognize him as her husband. Does she even know who I am? She continues to visit Fiona, but she treats him as some persistent visitor who took a special interest in her. Grant is mortified by Fiona's politeness and bewilderment at his self selfhood as Fiona's husband is disrupted by her failure to remember him as her husband of nearly 50 years. Fiona's AD and the forced separation requested by the nursing home may have disrupted Grant's selfhood as her husband, but it also provides an opportunity for him to build more intimacy with Fiona than he had before, thus compensating for his past betrayals in their marriage. Although Grant wonders whether Fiona's failure to recognize him and her attachment to Aubrey is some kind of a performance, a charade she's putting on to punish him for his past infidelities, he decides to love and take care of Fiona regardless of her reaction. After Aubrey leaves Madeleine, Fiona is upset, and her health deteriorates so rapidly that the nursing home supervisor suggests that she may need to be moved to the second floor, reserved for the residents who need prolonged bed care. To avoid Fiona's relocation, Grant pays a visit to Aubrey's wife, Marianne, asking her to take Aubrey back to Madeleine to visit for Fiona's sake. However, when Grant finally brings Aubrey to Fiona's room to visit her, she could not recall her attachment to Aubrey. This is a quote from The Bear Came Over the Mountain. "I'm happy to see you," she said, and pulled his earlobes. She refers to Fiona and him refers to Grant. "You could have just driven away," she said. "Just driven away without a care in the world and forsaken me. He kept his face against her white hair, her pink scalp, her sweetly shaved skull. He said, 'Not a chance.'" This ending remains ambiguous. While Anne Carol Howells reads Fiona's involvement with Aubrey as a joke she made to her husband, Bigona Simone is more inclined to read the ending at face value as a genuine recognition devoid of any vengeful connotations. Indeed, Fiona's 80 symptoms of linguistic deterioration appears real by Munro's skillful reproduction of Fiona's misuse of the past particle of the word forsake. Forsook me, forsaken me, forsaken. But I argue that whether Fiona's recognition of her husband is true or false is not the most important issue of concern in this passage. As Basting suggests, we should focus on who people with AD are now, complete with the missing word, repeated sounds, and hazy memories, rather than who they were. What matters most is how love is generally exchanged between Grant and Fiona's relational selves, a hopeless lover and a new woman, despite the bumbling of words used by Fiona and Grant's past infidelities. Now I will move on to another short story called Spelling. It's about mother-daughter relationship. Rose is a stepmother. Rose originally assumed Rose is a stepdaughter. She originally assumed that her half-brother Brian would carry out the primary caretaking obligations. She had assumed that Brian and his wife Phoebe, whom she saw seldom, were keeping in touch with Flo. Flo is her stepmother. After all, Flo was Brian's mother, Rose's stepmother, but Rose soon discovered that gender norms of caregiving supersede blood relatedness in the execution of caretaking responsibilities, as Emily broadly observed that the vast majority of caregivers to the old, about 3/4, are women, primarily wives and daughters, but also daughter-in-laws and other female relatives. Rose's docility, her good behavior, was partly based on the vision she had been building up all evening and would never reveal to Brian and Phoebe. This is a quote from the Spelling. She pictured herself going to Henriette and looking after Flo, living with her, taking care of her for as long as necessary. She wasn't so far gone as to imagine Flo fitting comfortably into this picture, settling down to a life of gratitude, But the cranky Flo got, the milder and more patient Rose would become, and who then could accuse her of egotism and frivolity? As the paragraph shows, Rose accepts the role of a caregiving daughter because she secretly seeks to alleviate her half-brother and stepmother's accusation of her egotism and frivolity through becoming a sacrificial caregiver. However, Rose underestimates the overwhelming nature of caregiving of an elderly parent with AD, and her naive and romantic vision did not survive the first 2 days of being home after she realizes the seriousness of Flo's disability. When Rose cleans up the kitchen, Flo thinks the kitchen is the shop where she used to work, and she mistakes Rose for a customer behind the shop counter. Rose asserts her name, "I'm Rose." Rose said in a loud, slow voice, "We are in the kitchen. I'm cleaning up the kitchen." The words, loud and slow, reveal the conflicting attitudes of the caregiver. Rose speaks loudly and slowly to make herself understood more easily by a patient with AD. At the same time, however, her voice appearing loud and slow may also reveal that she has lost patience while interacting with a patient with cognitive disability. Although Rose asserts her name, Flo insists that she cannot be Rose. Rose is away, Flo said. On the second morning, Flo mistakes Rose for a caregiver from the county. Flo says, "You're that woman they were sending to look after me." Realizing the futility of correcting Flo's misinterpretation of her identity, Rose does not assert her name and identity this time. By agreeing that she is a professional caregiver sent to look after an AD patient, Rose's selfhood is redefined by her interaction with Flo, an AD patient who depends on her assistance. They are no longer stepmother and stepdaughter who are always at odds. Now I will talk about Munro's later story, Inside of the Lake. This story is focalized through a woman, Nancy, who has been referred to what she calls an elderly specialist, a euphemism for an Alzheimer's doctor, for her mind problem. Nancy decides to drive to the village where the specialist office is located. However, Nancy has difficulties locating the specialist's office. Without information of the doctor's name, she still attempts to find her way by asking for directions to the doctor's office. In her search for the doctor's office, she asks a man who is attending his garden for directions. During their conversation, she explains about not being sick, for she feels that she is beginning to sound quite silly. What Marlene Goldman calls Nancy's emotional sensitivity and her desire to avoid being shamed are epitomized in the following passage. Here's a quotation from Inside of the Lake. When she's on her way out of the town, she catches sight of the man again in the rearview mirror. He's bending over, speaking to the couple of boys or young men who were sitting on the pavement. Maybe a remark to be made, some joke about her vagueness or silliness, or just her age. This passage indicates that Nancy is painfully self-conscious about her mental deterioration, for she is aware of the town people's discriminative view of the elderly afflicted with AD. As Stephen Post argues, the slippage of mental capacities is emotionally traumatic for the affected individual only when they begin to forget that they forget. Her awareness of the fact that she can no longer maintain her independence by caring for herself causes emotional strain between her former self and her AD-afflicted self. Finally, Nancy has got inside the nursing home but fails to get out of this place and go home, for she is unable to open the entry door. When she notices that there are no artificial lights on here and starts worrying that the place will get hot, dark. She senses that she can neither breathe nor yell for help. The reader might infer that some sort of help has arrived, since Nancy feels that her panic has stopped and she is nearly safe. It is not until the conversation between Nancy and the nurse, Sandy, takes place at the end of the story that we realize Nancy is already a patient residing in a nursing home. Quote, "There's a woman here whose name is Sandy. It says so on the brooch she wears, and Nancy knows her anyway. What are we going to do with you?" says Sandy. "All we want is to get you into your nightie, and you go and carry on like a chicken that's scared of being eaten for dinner. You must have had a dream." She says, "What did you dream about now?" As the conversation shows, Sandy encounters difficulty putting the night dress on Nancy because of the AD patient's symptom of wandering. Furthermore, the conversation also implies that the major part of the story that depicts Nancy's search for the doctor's office may not be a dream, but an illusion of an AD patient. I suggest that it could be argued that Nancy's relational self that is established through the light-hearted conversation with the nurse becomes more relaxed than her well-organized former self. Following Kidwood and Bradding's assertion that the self in AD should be seen in social rather than individual terms, an AD may become an exemplary model of interpersonal life. Herskovit reminds us that neurologically impaired elderly are more authentic and honest, healthier in their straightforward interdependence on others, and their propensity to live in the present. Nancy becomes more playful and childlike when observing the world. She noticed that the floor of the nursing home is all silvery tiles, the sort that children love to slide on, and for a moment she thinks of the patient sliding a sleeping for pleasure, and the idea makes her light-hearted. Nancy's light-hearted thoughts about the nursing home echo what AD patients convey in another story by Monroe Spelling. Some of them say they are the happiest here they have ever been in their lives. The response of Nurse Sandy to Nancy at the end of the story also demonstrates how Sandy developed a relational self while providing care for patients with dementia. Sandy's question to Nancy, "What are we going to do with you?" reflects her frustration and irritability stemming from the disordered behavior of a patient with dementia. However, Sandy quickly overcomes her impatience and asks Nancy, "What do you dream about this time?" demonstrating patience in communicating with a patient with dementia. Not all nursing home staff are trained in dementia care, and even trained staff may lack practical experience. Through interaction with Nancy, Sandy evolves into a professional caregiver with advanced skills and practical experience in dementia care. Now I will move on to talk about the collaborative caring relations in Monroe's story. In her Uncanny Subjects, Aging in Contemporary Narrative, Amelia DeFalco explains that Monroe's stories about AD depict the potential for a kind of pleasurable collaboration between AD patients and caregivers that arises within the altered circumstances of aging and dementia. But I will use bittersweet rather than pleasurable as used by DeFalco to describe the collaboration between caregivers and care receivers, as the use of pleasurable seems to underestimate the bitterness that coexists with the pleasure gained through the interaction between caregivers and patients. For example, in the bear camp over the mountain, Fiona's AD seems to provide Grant with an opportunity to see Fiona as who she is rather than who she was, thereby provoking him to pursue Fiona again. Towards the end of the story, the possibility of pleasurable collaboration seems to arise between the new woman and the hopeless lover as they declare their love for each other. Their embrace is bittersweet, however, when Grant's happiness of touching Fiona's sweetly shaped skull is shadowed by his sadness of smelling the unpleasant odor of an AD patient. Her skin or breath gave out a faint new smell, a smell that seemed to him like that the stem of cut flowers left too long in the water. Now I will talk about the spelling, another story by Munro. Before the stepmother Flo suffered from AD, the stepdaughter Rose's relationship with her had been more conflictual. In spelling, Flo's loss of memory compels Rose to have a fresh and overwhelming realization of the gulf between them. She realizes that Flo's reproaches regarding her bare, rusted costume in a theater performance were painfully truly meant. They were all a hard life had to offer. In other words, Flo did care for Rose in her own way, which is formed by Flo's hard life. Rose's acknowledgement of the gulf between them and respect for Flo's otherness thereby facilitate an act of reconciliation between the two women. This is a quote from Spelling. Rose made a trifle. That was lovely, she said. Rose had never heard such an admission of grateful pleasure from her. Rose thought that she had never done anything in her life that came as near pleasing Flo as this did. The repetition of never in this passage shows that taking care of Flo provides Rose with pleasurable respite from a bittersweet spent-seeking recognition, gratitude from her stepmother. After looking after Flo for 2 days, however, Rose realizes that she has to send her to the nursing home, for she cannot bear the pain of witnessing her stepmother's irreversible decline in physical and mental abilities. Ironically, Rose's guilty feelings are assuaged after Flo moves into the county house. A bitter, sweet collaboration occurs between Rose and her stepmother when Rose visits Flo in the county home bringing Flo's wig. Flo mistakes the wig for a dead gray squirrel. Rose tells Flo it is in fact a wig, and both of them laugh. Flo jokes about what will happen to her if she put on the wig. I saw what she doing bring me a dead squirrel. If I put it on somebody, will be sure to take a shot at me. Perhaps Flo's joke produces a feeling of guilt in Rose, for she had frequently mocked Flo's shabby mothering. Regretting not acknowledging the gulf between them earlier, Rose dons a wig to give Flo an opportunity to laugh at her. Rose stuck it on her own head to continue the comedy, and Flo laughed so that she rocked back and forth in her crib. At this moment, they are no longer caregiving stepdaughter and demanding stepmother who resent one another. Both Rose and Flo can finally laugh together and get along well only when their relational selves are established through performing a comedy collaboratively. Rose has regained her identity as an actress, while Flo has become one of the happy audience who appreciates Rose's vocation. This is a quote from Spelling. I have got them, then refers to gallstones already, said Rose. I took them home. Did you? Did you show your father? Yes. Rather than mocking Flo's delusion or telling Flo that her husband is already dead, Rose accepts the worldview of the AD affected individual and attempts no correction. Following what validation therapy recommends that caregivers do. While Rose's non-corrective caregiving enhances the caring relation between them, waiting until a mother is terminally ill to reconcile taints their final collaboration with bitterness. Now there's a quote from Inside of the Lake. What are we going to do with you, says Sandy. All I want is to get you into your 90 and you go and carry on like a chicken that's scared of being eaten for dinner. Simone maintains that the nurse comparing Nancy to a chicken is patronizing, as she reduces an AD patient to non-human materiality. However, I propose that the way in which Sandy attempts to get Nancy into her nightdress can be considered as humorous rather than humiliating. As Stephen Post states, caregivers are advised to redirect AD patients' problematic behaviors in gentle reminders and humor rather than anger and forgetfulness. Although the conversation sounds light-hearted, the collaboration between Nancy and Sandy is bittersweet, since Nancy becomes disoriented because of the effect of AD. When Sandy asks Nancy what happened in her dream, she replies, "It was back when my husband was alive and when I was still driving the car." Nancy's reply indicates that she knows that her husband has passed away, and she's aware of her health condition and dependence on caregiver. Her grief over her lost capacities, however, is lightened up by Sandy's attentive listening and humorous inquiry. From the end of the story, "You must have had a dream," she says. "What did you dream about now?" "Nothing," says Nancy. "It was back when my husband was alive and when I was still driving the car." "You have a nice car." "Bobo, see, you are sharp as a tack." As the conversation shows, Sandy seems to have adopted two strategies to uphold the dignity of the person with dementia. First, she asks Nancy what happens in her dream, a euphemism for Nancy's disorientation and wandering. Second, after Nancy recalls clearly her late husband and the brand of her car, she is described as sharp as a tack by Sandy, who compliments her on her remaining capacities. By acknowledging the relational selves formed through the bittersweet interaction between AD patients and their caregivers, caregivers' endeavors in Munro's AD stories present possibilities of responding to AD patients, thereby proving the potential of the collaboration of the patient-caregiver relationship. In an interview in 1995, Munro expressed her inclination to write about what perplexes her. Quote, "Describing life made life bearable for me. Well, I am still puzzled. I realize the questions we ask are far more intriguing than the answers we give or sometimes think we've discovered." Well, describing life makes life more bearable for Munro. It could be argued that reading Munro's AD stories also makes caring relations between AD patients and caregivers more bearable for readers, including caregivers and AD patients. Munro's AD narratives neither simplify AD care as a hopeless burden nor idealize the selfless dedication of caregivers. Instead, I think Munro's stories present a bittersweet caring relationship, authentically depicting the patient's fear of appearing foolish and the caregiver's guilt over losing their patients. In summary, Munro's AD narratives do not provide answers to the caregiving challenges that readers face. Instead, these narratives invite them to re-evaluate the narrow definition of self on the basis of independence and question the perception of AD as social death by exploring the potential for patients and caregivers to establish relational self and collaborative caring relationships. To conclude, my study does not dismiss the metaphorical reading of AD. What I attempt to do is explore new metaphorical meanings that AD is used to stand for. I hope in the near future, when AD is mentioned, the disease's metaphorical meanings are no longer limited by social death or loss of self. Rather, AD can be used as a metaphor for self-reframing, namely redefining self, establishing a relational self or social rebirth, which means interdependence, establishing collaborative relations. The new metaphorical meanings of AD may be able to remove the stigma attached to AD, thereby making AD care more bearable. Finally, I would like to share you with part of the film of Lisa Genova's talk, What You Can Do to Prevent Alzheimer's. I think that's what we care about, right? How to start, what we can do to prevent Alzheimer's. I will just show the final part of this talk.
How to get the most of Grammarly free.
It's Kayla on behalf of Grammarly to tell you all about the free version of
The forest is 80% of people with Alzheimer's also have cardiovascular disease. Aerobic exercise has been shown in many studies to decrease amyloid beta in animal models of the disease. People who have more years of formal education, who have Alzheimer's, you have plaques and tangles and inflammation and microglia devouring that synapse. Now when someone asks you, hey, who wrote Still Alice? You can't remember because that synapse is either failing or gone. You've forgotten me forever. But what if you had learned more about me? Let's say you learned 4 things about me. Now imagine you have Alzheimer's and 3 of those synapses are damaged or destroyed. You still have a way to detour the wreckage. You can still remember my name. So we can be resilient to the presence of Alzheimer's pathology through the recruitment of yet undamaged pathways. And we create these pathways, this cognitive reserve, by learning new things. Now, ideally, we want these new things to be as rich in meaning as possible, recruiting sight and sound and associations and emotion. So this really doesn't mean doing crossword puzzles. You don't want to simply retrieve information you've already learned, because this is like traveling down old familiar streets, cruising neighborhoods you already know. You want to pave new neural roads. Building an Alzheimer's resistant brain means learning to speak Italian, meeting new friends, reading a book, or listening to a great TED Talk. And if despite all of this, you are someday diagnosed with Alzheimer's, there are 3 lessons I've learned from my grandmother and the dozens of people I've come to know living with this disease. Diagnosis doesn't mean you're dying tomorrow. Keep living. You won't lose your emotional memory. You'll still be able to understand love and joy. You might not remember what I said 5 minutes ago, but you'll remember how I made you feel. And you are more than what you can remember. Thank you.
So you are more than what you can remember. Yeah, I quite like this message given by Lisa. Okay, again, I thank Lilith for inviting me to give this talk. This is the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention. Should you have any comments or questions, feel free to email me